He didn't just leave me at the altar. He left me there long enough for 200 people to watch me break. I remember the exact moment I realized Ryan wasn't coming back. It wasn't when the wedding coordinator stopped making excuses about traffic. It wasn't when my father started pacing like a caged animal. It was when I heard laughter, not loud, not cruel on the surface. Just soft, polite laughter coming from a cluster of women near the bar who thought I couldn't hear them. 2 hours, one of them whispered. He's been gone for 2 hours. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not shattered, not yet, just cracked. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 years old that day, standing in a ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, waiting for a man who had already decided I wasn't worth showing up for. And what I didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that the worst part of that day wasn't Ryan leaving me. It was who stepped in after. I was standing just inside the bridal suite, my hand pressed against the edge of the door, trying to breathe through the tight corset digging into my ribs. Every inhale felt shallow, like the air refused to go all the way in. Outside, I could hear everything: the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of voices, the occasional forced laugh that sounded too sharp, too rehearsed. My Aunt Linda's voice cut through it all. Someone needs to tell her this whole thing is over. Over. I closed my eyes. For a second, I thought I might faint. Not from heartbreak, from humiliation. I had spent months planning that wedding. Every detail, every flower, every place setting. My father had written checks I didn't even want to think about. $500,000, he'd said once, like it was nothing. Like it was worth it to see his daughter happy. Now it felt like all that money had bought was a front row seat to my public disgrace. "Em," Chloe whispered beside me, grabbing my arm. Her nails pressed into my skin just enough to ground me. "We can shut this down, right now. We'll say there's an emergency. People will leave. You don't have to go out there." I looked at her. My best friend. The only person in that entire building who wasn't looking at me like I was a story to tell later. "What kind of emergency explains a missing groom?" I asked, my voice barely recognizable. She didn't answer, because there wasn't one. Phones were already out. I could hear it. The subtle clicks, the low voices saying things like, "Did you see his post?" and "Check Instagram." I didn't need to see it to know. Ryan hadn't just left. He had made sure people knew he left. Another ripple of laughter rolled through the ballroom. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not sadness. Something else. Anger. "Where is he?" My father's voice roared from across the room, loud enough to silence half the crowd. Chairs scraped, people shifted. "Where is that son of a dad?" I tried to say, but my voice didn't carry. I stepped forward anyway, pushing the door open just enough to see. He was standing in the middle of the ballroom, face flushed, fists clenched, his phone in his hand like a weapon. "He's in Vegas," he shouted. "Vegas. Drinking with his friends while my daughter stands here waiting for him like..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone else already had. Like a fool. The room wasn't whispering anymore. It was alive, loud, hungry. People leaned in closer, phones raised higher. I saw a woman I barely knew angle her camera toward me, waiting for me to step out, waiting to capture the moment I broke. That's when I realized something. They didn't feel sorry for me. They were entertained. My mother rushed toward me, mascara streaking down her face, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "My baby," she sobbed. "How could he do this to you?" I pulled back slightly. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't breathe. Because if I let her hold me, I might collapse. And I refused to give them that. Then everything changed. It happened so quietly at first, I almost didn't notice. The noise in the room didn't stop, but it shifted, like a current changing direction. Heads started turning. Conversations broke mid-sentence. A path began to open through the crowd without anyone being told to move. I followed their gaze, and that's when I saw him. Daniel Brooks, my boss, walking straight toward me like he belonged in the center of my disaster. And for a split second, I had one single terrifying thought. Why is he here? But the real question, the one that would change everything, was something else entirely. What was he about to do? Daniel didn't hesitate. Not for a second. He walked straight down the center aisle like the entire room belonged to him. Like the whispers, the cameras, the tension in the air were nothing more than background noise he had already decided didn't matter. People moved out of his way instinctively. I watched it happen, almost detached from my own body, like I was observing a scene instead of standing inside it. There was something about him, something controlled, deliberate, that made people step aside without thinking. My father turned first, his anger still burning hot. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he snapped, voice rough, edged with humiliation he didn't know where to put. Daniel didn't even look at him right away. His eyes found mine. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the suit, not the way he carried himself, not the fact that he had just walked into the worst moment of my life like it was a boardroom meeting. It was the way he looked at me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, not with that quiet, cruel satisfaction I had seen in too many faces already. He looked at me like he had already made a decision. "I apologize for the delay," he said calmly, his voice cutting clean through the noise like a blade. Traffic on the FDR was worse than expected. Silence. It fell so fast it felt unnatural. Conversation stopped mid-word. Even the music, some soft string arrangement that had been playing in the background, seemed to disappear. My brain couldn't catch up. Delay? Traffic? What was he talking about? Then he took the last few steps toward me, closing the distance between us, and leaned in just enough that only I could hear him. "Play along," he murmured. "Pretend I'm the groom." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. My heart slammed once, hard enough to make my vision blur at the edges. "Daniel." "What, he's gone?" he said quietly, his tone steady, almost clinical. "And right now, you have two options." His hand closed around mine before I realized what he was doing. Warm, firm, certain. "You walk out of here as the woman who got left at the altar," he continued, his voice low, controlled. "Or you walk out of here with a different story." I stared at him. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "You can't just," I started, but the words died in my throat. Because he could. Because he already was. "Decide," he said, not unkindly, but without hesitation. "Now." Behind him, I could hear the room starting to stir again. The silence cracking. Questions rising. My aunt's voice sharp and disbelieving. Someone laughing under their breath. The soft, unmistakable sound of a phone camera zooming in. I glanced past him. My father stood frozen, confusion replacing rage for the first time all day. My mother clutched her hands together like she was praying for something she didn't understand. Chloe's eyes were wide, locked on mine, silently asking what the hell I was about to do. And then I heard it again. That laughter. Not loud, not obvious. But there, waiting, ready. I felt the humiliation rise up again, hot and suffocating. The image flashed in my mind so clearly it made my stomach twist. The story they would tell, the way my name would sound when people said it, the pity, the judgment, the quiet satisfaction. Emily Carter, left at the altar. Something inside me snapped into place, not breaking, locking. I lifted my chin, slowly, deliberately, and I tightened my grip on his hand. "Okay," I said. My voice didn't shake. Not this time. Daniel nodded once, like that was all he needed. Then he turned. "Daniel Brooks," he said, extending his free hand toward my father with effortless composure. architect, and the man who's going to marry your daughter today." The gasp that followed wasn't subtle. It hit the room like a shockwave. My father blinked at him like he had just been slapped. "Excuse me?" "I understand this is unexpected," Daniel continued smoothly, as if we were discussing a contract instead of a wedding that wasn't supposed to exist. "But I assure you, everything is under control. Under control." I almost laughed. Instead, I stood there beside him, my hand still in his, my heart racing so hard I could feel it in my throat, and realized something terrifying. For the first time since Ryan disappeared, I wasn't the one losing control, and that scared me almost as much as it steadied me, because I had no idea what Daniel Brooks was really doing, and I had an even worse feeling that he did. My father was the first one to recover. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice low now, controlled in that dangerous way I had seen only a handful of times in my life. "This isn't a joke. My daughter is not marrying some man who just walked in off the street." Daniel didn't flinch, not even a flicker. "I didn't walk in off the street," he replied evenly. "I've known Emily for 3 years. That landed. Not because it solved anything, but because it shifted the room again. People leaned in. The narrative was changing, and they could feel it. My father looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was trying to find the answer in my face. "Emily," he said, slower this time. "What is going on?" I should have told him the truth. I should have said I had no idea what I was doing. I should have said I was terrified. But instead, I heard my own voice say, "It's okay." The words felt foreign, like I was borrowing someone else's strength. "It's okay," I repeated, louder now. My mother let out a small, confused sound. Chloe stared at me like I had just stepped off a ledge. My father's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that?" "No," Daniel answered before I could. "You don't have to believe anything right now. You just have to decide whether you want your daughter standing here being torn apart for the next hour or walking out of here married with her dignity intact." That hit exactly where it needed to. I saw it in my father's face. The calculation, the anger shifting into something else, something protective, something strategic. Because this wasn't just about me. This was about reputation, business, power. $500,000 and a room full of people who would remember every second of this. My father exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. "And what makes you think you can fix this?" he asked. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened just slightly. "Because I already am." The confidence in his voice didn't sound reckless. It sounded practiced. That's when the officiant cleared his throat. I had forgotten he was still there. The poor man looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes, his glasses slightly crooked, his notes clutched too tightly in his hands. I need documentation," he stammered. "Identification. Legal verification. I can't proceed without—" "I have everything," Daniel said. Of course he did. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, then calmly unfolded a set of documents like this had been planned weeks in advance instead of minutes ago. Birth certificate, identification, everything. My brain struggled to catch up again. Who carries their birth certificate to a wedding? I leaned closer, my voice barely a whisper. "You came prepared for this?" "Not for this," he murmured back without looking at me. "For anything." That answer didn't comfort me. If anything, it made something cold settle deeper in my chest. The officiant took the papers with shaking hands, scanning them quickly, then more carefully, then again like he was hoping to find a reason to stop this. "These appear to be in order," he said slowly, "but I must remind you both. This is a legally binding marriage." Legally binding. The words echoed louder than anything else that had been said. My heart stumbled. This wasn't pretend. This wasn't just saving face. This would be real. I turned my head, looking out at the room again. The phones were still up, the eyes still watching. But something had changed. They weren't laughing anymore. Now they were waiting. And that was worse. Because now they weren't expecting me to fall. They were expecting something else. A twist. A spectacle. A story worth telling. Daniel shifted slightly beside me, just enough that I could feel the steady presence of him. "You can still walk away," he said quietly. "No one will stop you. I knew that. I also knew what walking away would look like. The whispers would come back. Louder this time, sharper, final." I swallowed, my throat dry, and looked at him. At the man who had stepped into my worst moment without hesitation. At the man who was offering me a way out that didn't feel like running. "Do you trust me?" he asked. It was such a simple question. And the truth was, I didn't. Not really. I didn't know him like that. But I trusted something else. The way he had walked in, the way he hadn't looked at me like I was broken, the way he was standing here now, steady, unshaken, like he had already decided this was going to work. I took a breath, and then I nodded. "We're sure," I said, my voice clear enough to carry. The officiant hesitated for half a second. Then he straightened his papers. "Very well," he announced. "We will proceed." A ripple moved through the room, not laughter, not pity. Something else, something electric. And as Daniel guided me toward the altar, his hand firm at the small of my back, I realized something I hadn't expected. The humiliation was still there. The fear was still there. But underneath it, there was something rising to meet it. Something stronger. And I had a feeling. There was no turning back now. I barely heard the beginning of the ceremony. The officiant's voice droned on about legal obligations in the state of New York, but the words slipped past me like water. All I could feel was Daniel's hand at my back, steady, warm, guiding me forward one step at a time. The aisle I had imagined walking down with Ryan suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to a different life I had already lost. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked quietly without looking at me. "No," I answered just as quietly. "Not even a little." "Good," he said under his breath. "That means you're still thinking." I almost laughed. The absurdity of it all hit me in waves. 3 hours ago, I was fixing the train of my dress and checking my lipstick in the mirror, convinced I knew exactly how my life was going to unfold. Now I was standing at the altar with a man I barely knew, about to make a decision that would legally bind me to him. The officiant cleared his throat. "Do you, Daniel Brooks, take Emily Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "I do." He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. Not rushed, not forced, not uncertain. My heart stuttered, because for a split second it didn't sound like he was pretending. "And do you, Emily Carter, take Daniel Brooks to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Everything slowed. I could feel every eye in the room on me, my father's presence like a weight behind me, my mother's quiet sobs somewhere off to the side, Chloe holding her breath, and somewhere deeper than all of that, the echo of Ryan's absence. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For a moment, I was suspended between two versions of myself, the woman who had waited and the woman who refused to be left behind. Daniel's fingers tightened around mine, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me he was there. "You don't have to rush," he murmured. But we both knew I did, because hesitation would look like doubt, and doubt would give them everything they wanted. I inhaled slowly, ignoring the tightness in my chest, the way my heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "I do," I said. The words came out softer than his, but they held. they stayed. The officiant nodded, almost relieved. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Husband and wife. The phrase didn't feel real. Not yet. You may kiss the bride. Panic flickered through me instantly. We hadn't talked about this. We hadn't planned any of this. I turned slightly toward Daniel, my mind racing, my body tense, unsure what he was going to do. He seemed to read it all in a single glance. "Relax," he whispered. And then he leaned in. The kiss was brief, soft, barely more than a brush of his lips against mine. But it was enough. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, whistles. The sharp, rapid clicking of cameras capturing every angle of what had just happened. I stepped back instinctively, my breath catching as I tried to process it. "It's done," Daniel said quietly near my ear. "Now smile." I forced my lips into something that resembled a smile, turning with him to face the crowd. The same crowd that had been ready to watch me fall. Now they were clapping for me, celebrating me, rewriting the story in real time. I could see it in their faces, confusion, curiosity, respect, because this wasn't the ending they expected. This was better. For me. For them. For the story. My mother rushed forward first, still crying, but now her expression was different. Not just grief, relief. "Oh my God," she whispered, pulling me into a tight hug. I didn't know you two, neither did I murmured before I could stop myself. She pulled back, searching my face, but before she could ask anything else, my father stepped in. He looked at Daniel for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You and I are going to talk," he said finally. Daniel inclined his head slightly. Of course. Not defensive, not intimidated, just certain. My father glanced at me again, something softer flickering behind the confusion. Then he nodded once, like he had made a decision, and stepped away. The pressure in my chest loosened just a fraction, but not enough. Because as the guests began to approach, offering congratulations that felt too eager, too curious, too carefully worded, I realized something. This wasn't over, not even close. This was just the beginning of a different kind of performance. And I had no script, no plan, no idea how to be someone's wife, especially not his. I turned slightly, lowering my voice as the first wave of guests closed in. What happens now? Daniel didn't look at me. He just smiled at the crowd like he had done this 100 times before. "Now," he said under his breath, "we make them believe it." The first person to reach us was my Aunt Linda. Of course it was. She moved faster than anyone else in the room, her smile wide, her eyes sharp, scanning both of us like she was already piecing together a story she couldn't wait to tell later. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness, "this is certainly unexpected." Daniel didn't miss a beat. Life rarely follows a straight line. He replied smoothly, offering his hand. "I'm glad it led us here." She blinked, just once. It was subtle, but I caught it. That moment where she realized she wasn't in control of the conversation anymore. She shook his hand anyway, her grip tighter than necessary. "I suppose we're all glad," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Behind her, more guests gathered. Faces I recognized, people I barely knew, colleagues of my father's, old friends, strangers who suddenly felt entitled to witness every detail of my life. "Congratulations," someone said. "Beautiful ceremony," another added. "When did this happen?" Came a third, less careful voice. I felt the questions circling, tightening, waiting for a crack. Daniel stepped slightly closer to me, his arm brushing mine in a way that looked casual but felt intentional, protective. "We preferred to keep things private," he said, answering before I had to. Given the circumstances, it seemed wiser. "Private?" the woman echoed, clearly unconvinced. That must have been difficult, working together and all. Working together. The phrase landed heavier than the others, because that part wasn't a lie. He was my boss. Had been at least, and now I didn't even know what he was. Yes, Daniel said calmly, but not impossible. His tone ended the conversation without making it obvious. The woman nodded, smiled too brightly, and moved on. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "How are you doing that?" I whispered out of the corner of my mouth. "Doing what?" "Making them stop asking questions." "I'm not stopping them," he replied quietly. "I'm redirecting them." That made sense. It also made me realize something else. He wasn't improvising. He was controlling every word, every pause, every glance. The event coordinator appeared beside us, clutching his clipboard like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice steadier now. "The reception is ready whenever you are. The orchestra is waiting and the guests are asking about the toast. Mrs. Brooks." The title hit me harder than the vows had. Daniel checked his watch, as if we were simply running behind schedule instead of rewriting reality. "Let's proceed," he said. Of course we would." He guided me forward, his hand resting lightly against my back again, and I followed because I didn't know what else to do. The ballroom looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The laughter had changed, the energy had shifted. This wasn't a disaster anymore. It was something else. Something people wanted to understand, something they wanted to be part of. We were led to the center of the room, where 2 crystal glasses waited on a small table. The orchestra began to play, soft and romantic, like none of this had ever been anything but planned. Daniel picked up his glass. I mirrored him, my fingers trembling just slightly against the stem. "I want to thank all of you for being here today," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "I know the circumstances have been unconventional." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd, controlled, careful, listening. "But sometimes," he continued, his gaze shifting to me, "life gives us exactly what we need when we least expect it." My breath caught, because he wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking at me, and for a moment, everything else faded. "Soph, Emily," he corrected smoothly. "Though I caught the slip, from the moment you walked into the firm, I knew you were different." My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the plan, or maybe it was. I didn't know anymore. "Your work ethic, your intelligence, the way you solve problems others don't even see," he went on. "But more than that, the way you treat people, with respect, with kindness. That's rare." The room was silent, listening, but I wasn't hearing them. I was hearing him, and something about the way he said it. It didn't sound rehearsed. "I don't know what the future holds," he finished, his voice softer now but somehow stronger. "But I know I want to face it with you." My fingers tightened around the glass. This was too much, too real, too close to something I wasn't ready to name. "To the unexpected," he said, lifting his glass slightly. I swallowed, forcing myself to respond. To the unexpected. Our glasses clinked. The sound was soft, but it echoed. Applause followed, louder this time, warmer, and then someone shouted it. "Kiss!" Another voice joined. "Kiss! Kiss!" The chant spread quickly, building, feeding off itself, until the entire room was calling for it. I froze. Again. Daniel turned to me slowly, one eyebrow lifting in silent question. My heart pounded. This time, I knew what was coming, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I nodded, just slightly. That was all it took. His hand moved to my waist, steady and certain, pulling me closer. And when he kissed me this time, it wasn't brief, it wasn't careful, it wasn't for them. It was slow, intentional, real. The room disappeared, the noise faded, and for a single disorienting moment, I forgot this wasn't supposed to be happening. When he pulled back, we were both breathing harder than we should have been. "What was that?" I whispered. His eyes held mine, darker now, something unreadable shifting behind them. "Convincing," he said. But there was a beat, a pause, and then quieter. Not entirely. The music changed before I could say anything else. A slower melody, softer, more intimate. The kind of song meant for a first dance. I felt it before I processed it, the shift in the room, the way people instinctively step back to clear space in the center of the floor. Daniel didn't ask. He simply took my hand. "Come on," he said quietly. I hesitated for half a second, because this was different. The ceremony had been chaos. The kiss had been something else entirely. But this was deliberate. This was something people would remember. "Do you know how to dance?" I asked, my voice low as he guided me forward. "I had to learn," he replied. "Comes with certain expectations." Of course it did. We stepped into the center of the room, all eyes on us again, but the attention felt different now, less sharp, less predatory, more curious, waiting. His hand settled at my waist, firm but not possessive, while my fingers rested against his shoulder. The first step was smooth, controlled, like he had done this 1,000 times. I followed, not because I trusted the situation, but because I trusted him not to let me fall. "That kiss," I said under my breath as we moved, my voice barely audible over the music. "That wasn't part of the plan." "No," he agreed. "You said convincing? It was. That's not what I meant." He spun me gently, the movement effortless, pulling me back in without breaking rhythm. "I know." I searched his face, trying to read something beyond the calm exterior he had maintained all day. Then what was it? His eyes held mine for a fraction longer than necessary. "Timing," he said. That wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. I opened my mouth to press further, but the music carried us into another turn, and for a moment I lost my footing, not physically, but mentally. Everything felt off balance, not the steps, the situation, the proximity, the way his hand at my back adjusted slightly, like he was aware of every shift in my body before I was. "Relax," he murmured. "You're overthinking." "I just married you," I shot back softly. "I think I'm allowed to overthink." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Fair point. We moved in silence for a few seconds, the rhythm steady, predictable, safe, and then he pulled me closer, not dramatically, just enough. My breath caught. "Daniel," I warned, barely above a whisper. "Trust me," he said. There it was again, that word. I didn't respond, I didn't pull away either, because despite everything, despite the absurdity, the risk, the fact that none of this made sense, there was something grounding about him, something that cut through the noise in my head. "You're handling this better than most people would," he added. "I'm not handling it," I said. "I'm surviving it." "Same thing," he replied. No, it wasn't. Surviving meant this would end. Handling it meant this would continue. The distinction mattered more than he realized. "People are going to talk," I said after a moment, glancing briefly at the edge of the room where clusters of guests watched us with thinly veiled fascination. "About us, about work, about everything. They already are. That doesn't bother you?" "No." I blinked. "Not even a little?" "No," he repeated, "because they don't get to define what this is." His tone wasn't defensive. It was final, like the decision had already been made. By him. "And what is this?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more careful. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he guided me through another turn, slower this time, letting the movement stretch out between us. "I don't know yet," he said finally. That should have been reassuring, honest. Instead, it unsettled me more, because I didn't know either, and not knowing in a situation like this felt dangerous. The music softened, signaling the end of the song. I felt it before I heard it, the room leaning in again, waiting for the final moment. Daniel didn't step back, not immediately. His hand lingered at my waist, his gaze steady, searching. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you're not the woman they think you are." I frowned slightly. "And what woman is that?" "The one who gets left," he said. The words hit harder than I expected, because he was right. That was the story they had already written for me, until he walked in. The music ended. Applause followed, louder, warmer. But I barely heard it, because something had shifted again. Not in the room, in me. Daniel released me slowly, like he was giving me the choice to step away first. I didn't, and that scared me more than anything that had happened all day. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And I had no idea what that choice was going to cost me. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until the crowd started thinning. It happened gradually, guests peeling away in small groups, the energy in the room softening, the music fading into something quieter, less performative. The cameras lowered, the questions slowed, and for the first time since Ryan disappeared, I could hear my own thoughts again. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because without the noise, without the constant need to react, there was nothing left to distract me from what I had actually done. I married him. Not pretended, not staged, married, legally, irrevocably. The word sat heavy in my chest as I stepped away from another round of polite congratulations and moved toward one of the tall windows lining the ballroom. Outside, Manhattan glowed in the early evening light, cars streaming past like nothing had changed, but everything had. Running away? Daniel's voice came from behind me. I didn't turn right away, taking a breath. "Same thing," he said. I almost smiled. Almost. He moved closer, but not too close. Close enough that I could feel his presence without being crowded. It was deliberate. Everything about him was. "Your father left," he said. That got my attention. I turned, frowning slightly. "What?" "Not permanently," he clarified. "He needed air. He'll be back." Of course he would. My father didn't walk away from things. He regrouped. And my mom? With him. I nodded slowly, processing that. It gave me a few minutes, maybe less. Silence settled between us again. Not uncomfortable, just aware. "What now?" I asked finally, crossing my arms over my chest like it might hold me together. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the room, scanning the remaining guests, the staff, the exits, like he was assessing something I couldn't see. "Now we get through the rest of tonight," he said. "Then we figure out the rest. That's not a plan. It's enough of one." I shook my head slightly. "You really didn't think past this moment, did you?" He looked at me then, really looked. "No," he said. The honesty caught me off guard. "You just decided to marry me," I pressed, my voice lowering in front of 200 people, "without thinking about what happens next?" "I thought about it," he corrected calmly. "I just didn't plan it. That's worse." "Maybe," he allowed. I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair, feeling the pins shift slightly under my fingers. "This is insane. Yes, we work together. For now." I paused. "What does that mean?" "It means that changes," he said, "immediately." Something in his tone sharpened my focus. "You're serious. I don't do this halfway, Emily." The way he said my name, steady, certain, sent something through me I wasn't ready to examine. "You'd what? Reassign me?" I asked. "Or remove myself," he said simply. My stomach dropped. "You can't just step down from your own company." I'm not stepping down, he clarified. I'm stepping back from you. There's a difference. Why? The question came out faster than I intended. He didn't hesitate. Because I want this to be your choice. That stopped me. Completely. I don't want you questioning whether you're here because of your job, he continued, or because of me. I am questioning it, I admitted quietly. I know. His honesty wasn't defensive. It was steady, grounded, and that made it harder to push against. I didn't ask you to do this, I said, softer now. No, he agreed, but you chose to stay. That was true, and I hated how much weight it carried. I looked away, back out the window, watching the city move like nothing had happened. I was going to marry Ryan, I said after a moment. I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. And now? I let out a short, breathless laugh. Now I don't even recognize it. That's not always a bad thing. I turned back to him, studying his face, searching for something I couldn't quite name. You didn't just do this to save me from embarrassment. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer right away. For the first time all day, I saw something shift in his expression, subtle, controlled. But there, you heard them, he said instead, what they were saying. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. The silence stretched, longer this time. He took a step closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough that I couldn't ignore him. I couldn't stand there and watch it happen, he said finally. That was still only part of it. I knew it. He knew it. Daniel, I said quietly, holding his gaze. Why me? The question landed between us, heavier than anything else that had been said. For a second, I thought he might deflect, redirect, control the conversation like he had all night. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me like he was weighing something, deciding. And when he spoke, his voice was lower than before, more honest, more dangerous. Because I've been watching you for 3 years, he said. My breath caught, not because of the words, because of the way he said them. Like this wasn't new to him. Like this moment had been building long before today. And suddenly, the room didn't feel so quiet anymore. It felt like something was about to break open, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. For 3 years, I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. Daniel nodded once. No hesitation, no apology. That's not... I stopped myself, trying to find the right word. That's not normal. A faint exhale left him, almost like a restrained laugh. No, he agreed. It's not. Then what is it? I asked, my pulse picking up again, not from panic this time, but from something else I didn't want to name. He didn't look away. It's attention, he said. It's noticing things most people don't bother to see. That sounds like an excuse. It's an explanation. I shook my head, my thoughts racing. You're my boss. You were my boss. You shouldn't have been watching me. I wasn't watching you like that, he said, his tone still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something sharper. I noticed you. There's a difference. I crossed my arms again, more out of instinct than defense. Explain it to me then. He took a breath, like he was deciding how much to say. I noticed that you're always the first one in the office, he began. You stay late even when you don't have to. You fix problems that aren't your responsibility. You make sure everyone else looks good, even when no one's paying attention to you. I blinked, because that wasn't what I expected. And? I asked. And I noticed the way you shrink around him, he said. The words landed like a blow. Ryan, he added, softer now. My throat tightened. You saw us, what? Twice? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. 3 times, he corrected. That's not enough to know anything. It was enough. I looked away, my gaze dropping to the floor for a second before I forced it back up. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that every time he walked into that office, Daniel said, his voice lower now, you became smaller. I didn't respond. Because I couldn't. Because he wasn't wrong. He spoke over you, Daniel continued, dismissed you, treated you like you were there to support him, not stand beside him. Stop, I said quickly. But it came out weaker than I wanted. He didn't stop. And you let him, he finished. The silence that followed was heavy, not tense. Heavy. Like something had been placed between us that neither of us could ignore. I loved him, I said, the words automatic, practiced. Daniel didn't argue. Did you? He asked instead. The question caught me off guard. What does that mean? I snapped, a little sharper now. It means, he said calmly, there's a difference between loving someone and getting used to them. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. That's convenient. It's honest. I turned away from him again, pressing my fingers against my temple like it might slow the thoughts spinning through my head. You don't get to rewrite my relationship just because you walked into a bad moment. I'm not rewriting it, he said. I'm pointing out what was already there. And what, exactly, do you think was there? I asked, turning back to face him. He held my gaze. Not aggressively, not softly, just steadily. I think you were settling, he said. That one hit deeper. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, and it felt true in a way I didn't want to admit. You don't know that, I said, but there was no conviction behind it. I know what I saw, he replied. And what you saw gave you the right to marry me, I challenged. No, he said. The answer was immediate, clear. No, he repeated, softer now. What I saw gave me the reason not to stand there and do nothing. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest shifting into something heavier, something harder to define. And the rest of it? I asked. The rest of it, he said, was a choice. Yours. Yes. And mine? I pushed. His gaze dropped briefly to my hand, still loosely at my side, before returning to my face. Also yours. I swallowed, because that was the part I couldn't argue with. I had chosen this. Not him, not my father, not the situation. Me. I don't even know you, I said quietly. That's true, and yet I'm married to you. Yes. The simplicity of his answers was starting to feel like a trap, or maybe an anchor. I wasn't sure which. This shouldn't make sense, I said. It doesn't, he agreed. And you're okay with that? For now. I frowned slightly. For now? Because not everything that matters makes sense at the beginning, he said. There was something in his voice when he said it. Something that felt personal. Daniel, I said, my voice dropping, more careful now. What aren't you telling me? For the first time since he walked into that ballroom, he didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes shifting just enough to tell me I had finally asked the right question. And whatever the answer was, it wasn't simple. Not here, he said finally. A chill ran down my spine because that meant there was more. A lot more. And for the first time since this all started, I wasn't just reacting to chaos. I was standing on the edge of something I didn't understand, something bigger than a ruined wedding, bigger than a rushed marriage. And I had a feeling. Whatever Daniel Brooks had just stepped me into, it was only just beginning. By the time the last guest left, the ballroom felt like a different place. The lights were dimmer. The music had stopped. The staff moved quietly in the background, clearing glasses, folding linens, erasing the evidence of what had just happened like it was just another event on a schedule. But it wasn't. It was my life, and it had changed in less than 12 hours. I stood by the window again, my shoes finally off, my feet aching in a way that felt almost grounding. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, steady, unchanged. Cars passed, lights flickered. People walked by without any idea that inside this building, everything had shifted for me. "Do you want me to call your parents?" Daniel's voice came from behind me. I shook my head before turning. "Not tonight. They're going to want answers." "I know, and your father will calm down," I cut in. "Or he won't. Either way, I can't deal with that right now." Daniel nodded once, accepting it without pushing. That was something I was starting to notice about him. He pushed when it mattered. He didn't when it didn't. "The suite is ready," he said after a moment. "It's included in the booking." Of course it was. The bridal suite. The irony wasn't lost on me. I let out a quiet breath, glancing toward the hallway that led away from the ballroom. "We can't not use it," I said. "People will talk. They already are. That's not the point." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Then we use it." "Separate sides," I added quickly. A faint hint of amusement touched his expression. "Of course." We walked out together, the silence between us no longer filled with tension, but something quieter. He carried my bag without asking. I didn't argue. The elevator ride was short. Too short. Because the moment the doors opened, reality closed in again. The suite was exactly what it was supposed to be. Too perfect. Soft lighting. A bed covered in white linens and scattered rose petals. A bottle of champagne on ice. 2 glasses waiting. It looked like something out of a movie. Something that had nothing to do with what today had actually been. I stepped inside slowly, taking it in, feeling a strange disconnect between what I saw and what I felt. "This was supposed to be with him," I said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. I set my bag down near the chair, my fingers lingering on the fabric for a second longer than necessary. "I need a shower." "There's clothes in your bag," he said. "Your friend packed it." Of course Chloe had. I nodded, moving toward the bathroom without another word. The hot water hit my skin harder than I expected. I stood there longer than necessary, letting it run over me, trying to wash away the day, the humiliation, the anger, the confusion, the kiss. That part lingered, more than it should have. I pressed my hands against the tile, closing my eyes. This wasn't real? It couldn't be. And yet, when I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, the reality was still there. Daniel stood by the window, his jacket gone, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked different. Less like my boss, more like a man who had just lived through the same chaos I had. He turned slightly when he heard me. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Cleaner," I said. "Not better." He nodded like that made sense. "There's food," he added, gesturing toward the table. "You didn't eat. I hadn't even thought about it. But now that he mentioned it, I felt it. The emptiness. The way my body was starting to catch up with everything my mind had been trying to process. "Thank you," I said, sitting down. We ate in silence at first. Not awkward, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something loud. "What are we going to tell people?" I asked finally. "The truth," he said. "That we got married because my fiancé left me and you stepped in? That's part of it. And the rest." He set his fork down, looking at me in a way that made it hard to breathe for a second, that we're figuring it out. I let out a small breath. That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe. "You're very calm about this." "I'm very certain about parts of it." That caught my attention. "Which parts?" His gaze didn't waver. "That I meant what I said earlier." My stomach tightened slightly. "At the toast?" "At all of it." I looked down at my plate, then back up at him. "You don't even know me like that." "I know enough." "That's not the same." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The honesty again. It disarmed me more than anything else he could have said. "And what if this doesn't work?" I asked quietly. "What if we wake up tomorrow and realize this was just adrenaline?" He leaned back slightly, studying me. "Then we deal with it like adults. That's not comforting. It's real." I nodded slowly, because he wasn't wrong. None of this was comforting. It was real, and real didn't come with guarantees. The silence settled again, heavier this time. Not empty, full. "What happens tonight?" I asked after a moment. His eyes softened just slightly. "We rest." "That's it?" "That's enough." I held his gaze for a second longer, searching for something I couldn't quite define. Then I nodded, because for the first time all day, I didn't want to fight anything. Not the situation, not him, not myself. I just wanted peace. Even if it was temporary. Even if it only lasted until morning. Because something told me morning was going to change everything again. I woke up before him. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside the windows. It took a few seconds for reality to catch up, for the memory of everything that had happened to settle back into place. The wedding, Ryan, Daniel. The word husband pressed against my thoughts, unfamiliar and heavy. I turned my head slowly. He was still asleep beside me, one arm resting loosely across the bed, his breathing steady, his face softer than I had ever seen it. Without the suit, without the control he carried so effortlessly the day before, he looked human. Not my boss. Not the man who had walked into chaos and taken over, just a man. And somehow, that made everything feel more real. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't need to check it to know who it was, but I did anyway. Missed calls, messages, my mother, my father, Chloe, even a few numbers from work. The world had caught up. Daniel stirred slightly, his arm shifting as his eyes opened. For a second, he looked disoriented. Then he saw me, and everything settled. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my own voice quieter than usual. He reached for his phone, glanced at the screen, and let out a slow breath. That didn't take long. How bad? He turned the phone slightly, showing me the notifications. It's everywhere. Of course it was. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me, suddenly aware of the reality pressing in from all sides. My parents want to talk. They should. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair. They're going to ask questions I don't have answers to. Daniel sat up beside me, closer now, his presence steady in a way I was starting to recognize. Then we answer the ones we can. And the ones we can't? "We don't lie," he said. "We just don't pretend to know what we don't." I looked at him, studying his face, trying to understand how he could be so calm about something that felt like it could unravel at any second. "Why aren't you panicking?" I asked. He met my gaze without hesitation, because I meant it. There it was again, that certainty. It should have made this easier. It didn't. "What if I didn't?" I asked quietly. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't pull away. "Then we figure out what you do mean," he said. No pressure, no demand, just space. And somehow, that made it harder to breathe. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, standing up slowly. The room looked different in the morning light. Less like a fantasy, more like a place where decisions had consequences. "I don't know what this is yet," I admitted. "I know. I don't know if I can just step into this and pretend it's real. I'm not asking you to pretend." I turned back to him. "Then what are you asking?" He stood, closing the distance between us just enough that I couldn't ignore him, but not enough to corner me. To give it time. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now. I searched his face again, looking for doubt. I didn't find it. "I'm scared," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I know that this is too good to be real." His expression shifted slightly, softer now. "Then don't treat it like something perfect," he said. "Treat it like something possible. Possible." The words settled differently. Less pressure. More choice. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. Okay, I said. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't certainty, but it was something. He exhaled just slightly, like he had been waiting for that. We'll go see your parents, he said. We'll deal with everything else after. Together. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. I picked up my phone again, looking at the messages, the missed calls, the reality waiting on the other side of that door. Then I looked back at him. At the man who had walked into my worst moment and refused to let it define me. And for the first time since yesterday, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. I felt like I had a choice. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes the right story doesn't start the way you planned. Sometimes it begins in chaos, in heartbreak, in moments that feel like endings. But if you're brave enough to step forward anyway, it can become something else entirely, something stronger, something real. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop 3 words in the comments that describe what you would have done.